Hey, good morning, y'all. Hope you're doing good today. So, I have several things that I'd like to share with you all, and it's going to be sort of a mishmash of different topics, but I hope that it gets the wheels turning for you, like I always say, and I hope that you just find value in the message altogether. So, thanks so much for being here. I wanted to touch on boundaries this morning, and this is something that, growing up in the 80s, I never heard of this. And, well, first of all, those of us who grew up without the internet, it's what a change. What an absolute, just mind blowing change we have experienced coming into this new age of internet, right? Where there's so much information at your fingertips, and, you can just really expand your knowledge in whatever areas of interest that you have. And so one of my areas of interest has always been psychology. I've loved very ancient history and just philosophy and religion, spirituality, and topics like that. They've always been of great interest to me. Basically, the really deep and meaningful parts of humanity, things of the heart, that's always been my main area of interest. But I feel like my phone's crooked, and there we go. So, but yes. So, boundaries. This is something that we hear a lot online now, and I actually was beginning a video on this, watching someone else's video on this earlier this morning. But a lot of the channels that I follow talk about this too, and so I thought I'd just touch on it. I think that boundaries can be, well, first of all, just like anything else in this world, okay? It's not just boundaries. It can literally be anything. It can be misused and used as an excuse, okay? I feel like if somebody institutes a boundary with you, and and it's hurtful, and you question, like, what have I done? And you're trying to replay everything in your mind, all of your experiences with this person or whatever it is, you just can't figure out what the problem is. Then at that point you have a choice to, either try and approach them and ask, what you've done, or you have to just, be able to let that go without the answers. And that's hard, to not have answers. I don't know that I have really experienced that on the receiving end, but because I really never got confirmation, but I have had, I can think of one person who, was in the extended family. I tried really hard to stay in contact with and reach out to, and it just wasn't, it was a little bit of receptivity at one point, but it just wasn't much beyond that at all. And that was hurtful. And I really had no answers, as far as that goes. But the thing is, I think we have to come to a place of peace. We have to come to terms with. They call it radical acceptance. All these terms now, they all kind of essentially mean the same thing. We just have to eventually say, you know what, I'm not going to have all the answers. And if someone's not around me, then they don't want to be around me. And I may not ever know why. I can speculate, till the cows come home, but I'm not going to have confirmation unless they tell me directly, We just have to come to terms with that. And again, I know that's not easy, but, and, for us, if we feel the need to institute a boundary towards someone else, a lot of times we may feel like they know that they've been cruel to us. They know that they've been manipulative or coercive or whatever it is towards us. They've used us, whatever. And we can be very certain of that, but it's possible that they're not fully conscious to that fact. And that's a weird thing, the fact that we can, all of us, just operate in this world to varying degrees of conscious awareness, psychologically. But it's true. And I've just come to the place where I've accepted that, it's a whole lot better to just know that we don't know everything. And to me, the more certain a person is about anything at all, the more their credibility kind of tanks for me. Because there's this old expression, this old saying that goes something like, the more we learn, the more there is to learn. And, that seems to be very true. The more that we, know, the more we realize that we don't really know anything at all. And that helps. That helps just to adopt that mentality. And, there's a Bible verse that says, the wise have to become as a fool to become wise. In other words, you have to accept. If you really want to be wise, you have to accept that you don't know it all. And so the truth is, you just don't know if the other person, as far as boundaries go, if they understand what they've done, or not, and if they do, to what degree, and they're still going to experience things from their own, mentality, their own position, their own perspective. And there's literally no way for us to fully step into their shoes. We can somewhat, we can think that we can. That's what they kind of define as being empathetic, being able to be in another person's shoes. But in reality, we all just have such limitations. And so I think that boundaries are useful because for some people, they may have been subjected to a lot of torment, and it, could be physical, it could be mental, psychological abuse, it could be emotional abuse, it could be, and this kind of stuff is all life-threatening, and it's really impactful to people, and it can wear people down and break people down so much that a lot of people never even get the courage and the strength to stand up for themselves. And so it can take some people, some never get that courage ever, and others, it takes them decades, many decades sometimes, to become conscious enough of what's going on, that they're not the problem, that it truly is these other people. And it's not about judgment. It doesn't have to be about judgment. It can simply be about acknowledging what is. Sometimes things just are what they are. That's another saying. It is what it is. They just are what they are. And you don't have to add a layer of judgment, but acknowledging things, acknowledging reality, and getting out of some type of illusion or delusion that, like they say, love is blind. Well, it doesn't have to always be romantic love. It can be any kind of love that we have for family members and friends, whatever it is. We have to sometimes be courageous enough to step outside of the strongholds in our mind, that can keep us bound to a situation that is very harmful to us. And another word that's thrown around a lot is toxic, but essentially it's, if something's toxic, that's kind of like, I'm thinking about a literal physical substance, it would be equivalent to poison. And things can poison our mind. We can be manipulated into thinking that we have no worth at all, or that we're stupid, or that we are, we have no value other than to be laughed at, or to be used, to be exploited, that we have to earn our worth. And there's all these horrible, what would be labeled toxic situations that we can be conditioned to believe in those things about ourselves. And so when I say boundaries can be life-saving, they can absolutely be life-saving. And it takes some people many, many years to step out of these illusions of, thinking that a person really cares for you, when in reality, and they may care for you, but they may be so twisted in their mind with mental illness and their own horrible life experiences and conditioning and skewed way of seeing things that it's still affecting you, okay, in a negative way. And so, but boundaries can be life-saving. And so I just wanted to comment on that. And I think that sometimes that can just be an excuse to not associate with somebody too, for various reasons. You know, it could be, you could speculate all day long. But so there's my first little part of the video on boundaries, some thoughts on that. The other thing is, I watched this movie. How long has it been now? It's within the last week, 4 or 5 days ago. And I don't watch movies hardly ever anymore because really I'm just super busy, and I don't really have the time to just sit there through a whole movie, and because I'm constantly thinking I need to do this and this and this. There's this whole list that I rattle off in my mind of, you know, stuff I could be doing. And so, but anyway, this was just captivating, and I'll drop a link down below if it'll let me. I don't know if I can put links in the description or not, but you can probably Google it as well. The movie was called, and it was on YouTube, Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. And I'd never heard of this movie before. And it's about this elderly lady who was widowed, and she had moved into what they called a residential hotel in London, I believe. And it's kind of like, it doesn't go super deep into the characters and their personal stories, but it was, the whole feeling of the movie was very touching. And if you are a person who is very much led by your heart, excuse me, you're very heart-oriented and you love very deeply, then this movie will resonate and touch your heart very much. I historically have never done this, okay? I just don't do this. But this whole entire movie, I cried through all of it. Literally all of this movie was so touching that I was just had tears streaming pretty much the whole time. So it was just so touching. I'll just sum it up and say this, you know, you kind of got to know a few of the characters, the other, you know, retirees and elderly people that lived at the retirement type hotel. And it was about our chosen family and how there's a difference between, you know, our blood family, our relatives, versus our chosen family, and how people can, you know, just haphazardly enter our lives and for a brief time and make all the difference in the world. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful movie, and I was so glad that I stumbled upon it and that I watched it. I took the time to watch it, so I had to mention that for you all. Again, it's called Mrs. Palfrey, Palfrey, at the Claremont. So if you have interest, you can look into that. I had another topic. Let me see if I can remember. So I can't remember. I stopped my video for a minute to think about this, and I'm gonna put these two clips together. I cannot remember for the life of me what I was going to talk about. But I will make another video if it comes back to me. If it comes back to me, then it's meant to, and I'll share that at that time. But and a lot of this that I share on my channel is self-talk on my journey, my walk, and I'm just sharing it because, you know, I feel like a lot of my videos, maybe you can learn something from them here and there, but in general, my intention is just to offer you encouragement and just yeah, that's pretty much it, to encourage you when life gets hard, you know, and maybe to give you ideas too, here and there, you know, spark some creativity and some interest in various books and topics and things like that for you to just take and run with and do more research, you know, to what's the word I want to use? Enrich your life. Yeah. And so, yes. But if you are someone who has struggled to set boundaries, and you have, and you have felt more peace for it, and you've been able to think more clearly and things like that, well, then don't feel bad for doing it. And you know, it's kind of like, there is another topic that came to mind a couple of days ago. I think I even mentioned it in my last video when I was giving you guys a tour of my backyard. And that term is interference. I think that some of us are more, a friend of mine described it as open. She said to me, she goes, you're too open. And I took that as like open-hearted, open-minded and open-hearted, okay? And it's like when you operate that way, from your perspective, it may be that you're just a transparent, fully honest person, right? You have nothing to hide and you're just, you know, open in that way. But on the other side of things, people, and I believe people who are conscious of influencing you in a bad way, people who are manipulative, I can't really see that manipulation can be any other way other than intentional. I don't know. There's the whole spiritual idea that these negative entities can, in the spiritual realm, work through people and people not be aware of it. I don't know. But regardless, we don't have to have it all figured out, right? But I think those of us who have always operated that way, being too open, we have been more easily affected, more greatly impacted by external influence, meaning people and situations and things, our environment. And it's not that we want it to be that way. It's just the way we are. And who knows? Maybe it's literally the way God made us for whatever reason. Maybe it's, there's the whole argument of nature versus nurture. Well, who knows? Either God made us that way, and or it's our environment, the way we were brought up and conditioned to be. I don't know. But regardless, if you find that you are that way, you can try and want with all your heart to be able to stay in a job, a workplace environment, within a group, an organization, within a family, within a social circle, within a marriage, whatever it is, you can really want to stay there. But if it's affecting you so much that there has been a decline in your cognitive functioning, like you can't hardly even think straight and get to the place where some people can get to the place where they can't even string words together anymore. And people may think that they're an alcoholic or something. They've never even touched alcohol or whatever it is. I mean, things can affect a person so greatly. They can be gaslit, which basically means lied to such a degree that the connection within their own self, that they trust their own eyes and ears, can be broken. And some people will never understand that unless they experience it. And I hope nobody ever does, ever again. But unfortunately, the truth is, again, it is what it is. Some people do experience that. They can't even trust their own mind, their own judgment, because they've been made to feel like they're that stupid that they can't even do simple things or trust their own thoughts. If a person is subjected to that, that's psychological abuse over and over and over and over. You know, this other person can be controlling to such a degree that it can just about break another person's mind, okay? And it reminds me of like wild animals. The term is, I think with horses, to break horses. I think that's one of the terms, and it just means like to domesticate them, basically, where, they're not going to, buck and knock you off or whatever it's called. I don't know anything about equestrian type stuff, but I think that with sometimes controlling people can think they can apply the same kind of tactics psychologically to other people, and then they can be in charge of them and control them and use them, and they may use the other person for their paycheck, and basically somebody can turn into a workhorse for another person, and it just all kind of different reasons. But if you feel like your mind is, in decline, I mean, why would you stay in a situation like that? It's just, I mean, people can be made to feel guilty for wanting to remove themselves from, I believe that I would call that a toxic situation, because their mind is being poisoned. But again, I think the people who haven't either woken up to this in their own life, or people who have never experienced this, those people are very, very lucky. I don't know that they could really ever understand. I think that they may look at stuff like this as people just making stuff up, or just straight out lying, things like that. But people who've been through it know. They know. And going back to, some people who are just very open, like myself, we can wish all day long that we could be strong enough to remain in any environment around anyone and not be affected, but and I don't know that someone could change to that degree and actually be successful in that endeavor. I don't know, but why would you want to? Even if you could be strong enough and secure enough that you're unshakable, basically, okay, that you're unshakable, why would you want to still remain in an environment that is like that, that's constantly coming at you, trying to make you doubt yourself and feel bad about yourself and question your own perception of reality, and that's placing unrealistic expectations onto you, misplaced expectations, entitled attitudes where, you're expected to do for other people who can do for themselves, and on and on and on and on and on. Why? It's so I just hope that this is giving you some things to think about. And it's so easy for someone who has finally built up the courage to put a boundary in place. And if a person chooses to put a boundary in place, that is an alternative to walking completely away. So that's really an act of love, in my opinion, to put a boundary in place. That could be. None of this should be black and white, either or. I mean, there's so much intricacy to all this stuff, okay? But if a person is trying to make things work and they've tried everything else, and the other person's just not going to meet them in the middle ground, then to me, to put any kind of boundary there is an act of love, and also an act of self-preservation, saving their mind, and literally can be life-saving. Then I don't think that person who did that should ever be made to feel guilty about that, or made to further question themselves, especially if one of the main reasons that boundary was put in place to begin with was because of gaslighting, because of they were constantly made to question themselves. You know what I mean? And then the boundaries put in place as an alternative to walking away, which is, the boundary then becomes an act of love, and then they're still made to question themselves. You have to just really, really decide that it's not being selfish to literally protect yourself, your mind and your heart. It is an act of self-preservation, especially, and all of this should be rooted and grounded in peace, obviously, So, and a boundary can just be limited communication, or communication in a certain way, on your terms. Maybe if someone is cruel to you behind closed doors, maybe you only ever meet with them or speak with them around, the public, or it could be anything like that, where you feel like you'll be safe there, or whatever it is. But safety should always be a priority, and I just hope that this is giving you some things to think about, and I guess I'm going to wrap this up for now. So thanks so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.